Welcome to the keynote of the Cyber Leaders Exchange. My guest today is Chris DeRusha, the Federal Chief Information Security Officer and Deputy National Cyber Director. Chris, always a pleasure to have you on. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Yeah, absolutely, Jason. It's great to be with you in person finally.
Finally, it's only been a few years since we got to hang out. Part of today's discussion on the Federal Cyber Leaders Exchange is really focusing on zero trust. We have other talking about supply chain management, we have others, future of cyber. So I think we're going to hit upon a bunch of different topics, but because today is really focused on zero trust, let's start there. That's been roughly about 18 months ago, agencies started this long-term journey. Let me get an update. What are you seeing from the OMB level, from the White House level, about how agencies are doing in meeting the goals around zero trust?
Yeah, absolutely. So, what you're referencing, of course, is OMB Memo M2209, the U.S. Federal Zero Trust Strategy, which we did put out, I believe, January of 2022. So, yeah, no, I mean, we're down the road. What we did early on was we actually spent a lot of time developing specific implementation plans with all the agencies. And as you know, in the memo, there's a bunch of actions that they needed to complete within sort of some specific timeframes and some over a 3-year period, and we're more flexible on like when. And we've just been tracking the progress of all of that. We've been using that strategy to drive our budget priorities and drive our budget processes and data calls around that. So that's been a really exciting opportunity. And we're just starting to kind of see the culture change and the pickup for different agencies. And I guess like my favorite thing to hear sometimes from a CIO or a CISO is, I'm doing this because it's the right thing and I want to do it, not because you told me. And it's like, that's great, actually, right? Because it means that I think we are on the right path and we got it right. And I think we got it right because we did engage the community before we wrote it, before we issued it. We did public comment, as you may recall, and we obviously wrote it along with our agency partners. And I think by and large, it's getting traction because it is what agencies want to be focusing on, right? And know that we need to be. But it's put structure around that, it's put timelines, it's put pressure, it's gotten us more money than I think we would have gotten. And the word that I've been using is momentum. It's like it's really moving us. And all of our data, all of our metrics through FISMA are aligned around measuring the progress. We're seeing movement, tactical things, but really important things like MFA and encryption. Like we absolutely over the 2 years of staring at that and putting a lot of high level of accountability and agency on that, we're seeing serious movement. And in the end, where there's still challenges, those are at least known now to the agency so that they can manage that risk, accept it where needed, and make new investments around addressing it. So overall, I would say lots of progress tactically, but culturally is the most important thing here. We're on a road that I think we'll tack maybe left to right after that 3-year period concludes, but I predict we're going to stay on this path because it's one that everybody sees as the right path.
That is until the next path is opened up because of
Sure.
cyber hackers changes.
And we're always open to that, and we need to be some level of agile throughout all of this.
And you've been very clear about that. You're never done. That's why we call it a journey. Let me go back to a couple things you said. You mentioned you're tracking progress against the strategy. Agencies had short-term things, and then they had the longer term. I know you're not necessarily tracking publicly this progress, meaning there's not a big dashboard that I can go look at, but I'm sure you have dashboards internally. What are some of those metrics generally you're tracking? How much they're doing endpoint detection and response? How many or how many people have MFA fully installed? What are some of those metrics?
Yeah, absolutely. And so you're right. It's a mix. Like we do have on performance.gov sort of ratings of how everyone's doing, which are based on the FISMA metrics. Most of what we're tracking in M2209, the Zero Trust Strategy, are in FISMA metrics, and those are publicly available. But then you're right, there's a number of sort of did you do something or not, like on the password policies, where, how far down the road are you in moving away from these kind of old password policies that are just, getting cracked by open source tools in a couple hours, right? So it's like we've got to move beyond that. And so we have been tracking internally just sort of some of the action, single sign-on consolidation, things like that, right? And look, overall, we're making a ton of progress, and we at least understand generally where agencies haven't been able to hit those targets, why, and we've put the accountability at senior levels. The CIO and the CISO very much are tracking what the remaining challenges are, and frankly, I'll tell you, I'm very happy about this. Deputy secretaries are fairly fluid in, where they're at in their zero trust implementations. But the ones that I mentioned before, where we put the most attention, have been phishing-resistant MFA and encryption at rest and transit. And look, I think in part it was strategic to pick a couple of big things and important things that are pretty effective in stopping adversaries in the tracks. But we've also been measuring and tracking the progress of logging and, as you mentioned, endpoint detection and response capabilities. So it's really quite a number of things that we've been tracking the progress on. And look, like you said, you're parroting me, but I'll say it again. It's true. I don't think we will be done, but we, because of our adversaries are going to keep innovating, and you've got generative AI and new trends will continue to come, and we'll continue to have to adjust to that. However, we're on a good path, and we're moving in the right direction, and we are able to, and far better positioned than we were when I came in, to be able to tack to some of those new TTPs that we see.
All right, here's the hardest question so far.
Sure.
Remember, it's so far. During the Obama administration, maybe it was even into the Bush administration, there was someone in your position, or maybe even higher up in the White House, said, we're going to kill passwords dead. I can't remember the person offhand. Have you killed password? Are they dead yet? How close are they to being dead?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Closer?
Closer? The death, they hear the death spirals coming?
Yeah, certainly closer. We put in some of the most aggressive policy direction in M2209, and I really credit my colleague and partner Eric Mill, in the Office of Management and Budget, for just pointing out that, that modern techniques are cracking federal password policies. Not just federal, most organizations everywhere kind of have password policies that still are sort of designed for, I don't know, I guess humans trying to crack them, not the machines and automation that are actually cracking them. And it was time to say, we've got to get rid of these old policies where people are just switching one digit and you're not actually helping security by having all these rotations. People are doing weird things with where they store those, right? It doesn't work. So I think we still hold that principle of wanting to do what you said. I'll let somebody else.
Somebody said
I'll let
it.
the quote. Yeah, somebody
Yes.
said, some smart individual must have said that. But I think that's right, and we're making good progress towards it. But look, it's a big ocean tanker that you're turning, because people are still reliant on these policies while they get strong MFA in place.
Which I was going to go right there next. This is why MFA is so important. I think you see this. I've used this example before, but that when MFA is real is when you go to the gas station, you put your credit card in and ask for your zip code. Because if someone has stolen your credit card, they may not know your zip code. And that's a lighter version, but still it's MFA. It's a second factor that only potentially So where are we with MFA? Do you see, again, it's hard to say, every agency is different. It's hard to say across the government, but do you have any feeling of this is where we are stronger, we are better today than we were 6 months ago, 18 months ago, 24 months ago?
Yeah, look, in a number of places. I think when you look at kind of network layer, PIV implementation, or other FIDO2 methods, we're now breaking out and tracking phishing-resistant MFA versus SMS-based or other methods. We're tracking that on implementation by systems in a lot of cases, high-value assets. So at a system level, how done are you on the system? Not just sort of in your enterprise, how many people are covered, which sort of used to be the old way. And what we realized is if we're going to get fidelity and drive accountability using data, we're going to have to get specific on a system-by-system basis and point out that, if you've got 7% of users accepted, right, that you're not done, right? You don't get credit for that in our system of record here, which is why the numbers have been slower to come up, because actually to work through those challenges has taken us longer. But I'd say that we're taking on the last 10-mile problems, right? And those are the hardest ones. I think prior administrations had made good progress on this. And we've really pushed, and when you look at enterprise users, we're very high now. many agencies are well over 90% in MFA implementation across the board, and are tracking and pushing for and want to make that phishing-resistant MFA in all cases. And then you get to the application layer, and people are understanding that, as we directed in M2209, you also need to have phishing-resistant MFA in place of the application. So we can't just rely on this sort of perimeter authenticated in kind of access to all resources, right, like model anymore, as that's like a big principle of the zero trust strategy, and that we've got to have this as you authenticate into all of these critical resources individually to have that kind of segmented approach of protection. So yeah, I mean, making a lot of progress, but also, you're into some hard use cases now where some of the laggards are maybe there's old contracts in place and that need to be updated. Maybe that vendor's requiring new funds to implement it, and the agency's in a negotiation over that. We've definitely heard that in a lot of use cases because there's a lot of contractor-run systems in the U.S. government, actually. Finances, but we've done a lot to put money towards this, but still, in certain cases, projects need to be planned, things like that. So yeah, I mean, but overall, Jason, we feel really good about the progress we've made on this front.
We're going to talk budget in a second because I think that's the other piece, and I know that's something that I think the administration celebrated in this last budget request. But real quick on the single sign-on piece, I just wanted to touch upon that because that's the other piece here. Using phishing-resistant MFA to do single sign-on to get into your applications, to get onto the network, that's been something that we've talked about for years. HSPD 12, you mentioned PIV cards, was the initial, we have to get there, single sign-on. Certain agencies, I remember over the years, agriculture, interior were closer, NASA was closer, and then it's hard to say where they are today. What do you have a sense of how single sign-on is moving forward, and how's that kind of related to the zero trust?
Yeah, I mean, we're pushing on this. So a few things have changed since we've started those pushes, right? Like, we're pushing on it from two directions as well, because from a customer experience perspective, which is a big priority of my boss, Claire Martirana, a federal CIO, and from a zero trust perspective, we both want to see these consolidations and simplification of accessing resources, right? Like for all of the reasons, people can get more done quickly, securely, right, if we get there. So we have definitely seen movements to consolidations. Another big difference is login.gov is around now, and they're able to service a lot of customers, government customers, and I think a lot of agencies have had success there. And so, yeah, I mean, I think we've made a lot of progress, and there are various ways that we're tracking that. There's no question. But also, it can be hard and challenging, and at times you actually need like a kind of large IT project to manage a single sign-on consolidation. We've seen those types of requests at times in the Technology Modernization Fund, for example. So we're definitely continuing on that path and making good progress. But again, we're not done on that one.
You mentioned login.gov. I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't ask you a little bit about that. Obviously, we know the IG report. We don't need to rehash what happened. Mm-hmm. And I know that you're going to tell me you're satisfied with the progress they're making and the changes they've made. You're not going to tell me otherwise. At least I don't think you will. But what kind of conversations are you now having with other agencies, with GSA about login to kind of reestablish and ensure that there is confidence in the system?
Yeah, look, I mean, we are having those conversations. I mean, both in as OMB, we kind of sit over all programs. So of course, we in the federal CIO and CISO hats that we wear have been working closely with TTS at GSA to ensure that we are keeping that trust with agencies, and I think that they've made a great commitment to enhance communication, ensuring that they're being super clear about like where they're at with things with agencies and being as transparent as they can. Second to that, we're looking at like as the big thing that came out there was like sort of the realization that login.gov was not IAL2 compliant. But they're taking that really seriously. They have a real plan to ensure that they're communicating around the compensating controls that they have in place and measures. And I think at the end of the day, like in the meantime, that's sort of where we need to be, in that they're being clear about that. Agencies understand what that is, and then they can decide whether that is risk acceptance decisions that they want to make, and we'll also have a perspective and view on that. So we're working through that process, and then they're also developing their plans to how to become IL2 compliant. But remember, there's real concerns and issues at play around equity, other values that we hold dear in this administration that they've had to balance there, and like some of the technology, unfortunately, when it's doing facial recognition, is not equitable. And look, I mean, I think this is one of those hard problems. We have lots of them, and I think we just need to sort of name that as an okay thing. And I think it's good that everyone's raised attention around this, and we're doing a lot to address it.
And I know there's a recent announcement with U.S. Postal Service and Login partnership to create in-person verification, which is a big step, because I think there's something like 18,000 postal offices, postal places to go to begin that process. So.
That's right, and thanks for raising that, because that is another sort of interim control measure where that is a compliant approach, right? Again, this gets into when you're more doing the sort of remote verification is where the challenges kind of will continue to be, but this is another thing that we're doing, so thanks for reminding me to take credit for it, because like it is genius, the folks who came up with it, not me, but it is really great to partner with Postal Service because it's got the footprint. And I used to run physical security operations at the state of Michigan, and I had to get creative during COVID, and so it's like having these types of approaches is really smart.
Now, if we can get the State Department to come back to the Postal Service for passports, that'd be a whole different discussion. That's outside of your area, I know that. Chris, let's talk budget real quick as well, because then there's tons to talk about. You and I had talked, I guess, back, I want to say February or March timeframe, right before the budget rolled out. You had made a comment that this is the first time in the budget release we're going to really be able to say this is what we're spending on Zero Trust. And when I got there, I was very excited. And then I was like, well, where is this? It doesn't tell me Zero Trust spend is X, Y, Z. And then we've had a conversation since then where you kind of laid it out. But what did the budget request tell you about how agencies are spending money? Where are they? How have you worked with them to address, hey, your big issue is single sign-on or MFA or whatever it is? How has that kind of been played out since that budget release has happened, and you're heading into 2025 now, the budget?
Yeah, and I hope I don't get it wrong, but I think that the number that we ended up with was 5.5 billion for Zero Trust in the request. It was right around that, if that's not precise, which is great, because again, we were able to start putting a number around it. And what's important about that is what's behind that number. And what's behind that number is a system of data collection, right? Not only do we have the strategy, we had agency implementation plans, and we have budget data calls that go out to the agencies where they're required to map their cyber investment requests around those different categories. So for example, we've got I don't even know how many it is, but like 40 different terms of capabilities, and we define them clearly, and we put that out in the budget call, and so they're mapping all of this up with their tooling, with their projects requests, with their service buys, whatever it is. They're having to map that to those buckets, which are all in the Zero Trust pillars now. And so we're able to actually visualize here what we're talking about, and year over year, not just have the business intelligence aggregated top view of, is it 5.5 this year, 5.8 next year, whatever, right? We're able to drill down in each agency to that sort of layer of, okay, and on the identity cone, are you requesting more or less than last year, and why? Right? Because all data ever really lets you do is ask smart questions and then get more data or information, right? But we are able to use it that way. And yes, it's fairly early stage, but we can build off that model. And so I think that's, to me, is what I'm excited about as we embark in this next budget cycle. This year we have all that infrastructure in place, and it's fairly mature, and agencies have familiarity with it. So that just gets easier and easier. Things move faster. People don't what are you trying to do? They get it now, and then now you start to get sharper and sharper data over time.
That first time, always the hardest,
yes.
No matter what it is. First time you make a recipe.
The first time we actually tried to do it was before we even had the strategy printed. It was like a public comment. So yeah, we're in a better place.
First time you do anything, right? And then it gets easier each time. What is that also then saying to you from your seat at OMB about Zero Trust? Not only, again, culturally, you mentioned the change, the acceptance and accountability for CISOs and CIOs. But then you mentioned the DepSecs as well. I mean, that's the key piece. Have you talked about the budget / zero trust / the progress at the President's Management Council? How often does that come up? Quarterly, are you there? I know the meetings are monthly or quarterly these days. What's that conversation like? Because it's really, it's the RMOs and the OMB, we know them, and then it's the DepSecs and the budget folks that drive where the investments are made.
Yeah, for sure. So we have multiple sort of formats that I would say that we have conversations with deputies on cybersecurity. You mentioned one, so Deputy Director Jason Miller.
Not me.
Yeah, right. Another
the other one.
Well, the other Jason Miller.
I just want to be clear on that.
One of my bosses, yes, to be ultra clear. He runs the President's Management Council with deputy secretaries, and we do have at least a couple opportunities a year to get in there, talk to them. We're looking at kind of risk management, type of stuff there. Kind of we can cover a pretty broad gambit. We've definitely looked at and talked about how zero trust implementation is going. We've gotten their feedback, which is really helpful. I mean, I even got to do one of those in person and just have some of the DepSecs, share candid information back, which is always helpful because you know that they're paying attention and that they're listening to their teams who are telling them about the challenges they've got and or where we could be clearer and or more helpful on our end. And that is what you're going for. But we try not to do that monthly. They do have monthly meetings because we're also running, Deputy Newberger and National Security Council is quite often convening deputies. And she's been fantastic in help lift this up as a top priority to ensure that deputy secretaries are really staring at these problems and are when you have lots of deputy committee meetings, right, what happens is those deputies start getting regularly briefed because they're going to be ready for the next. They're not going to just go through it one by one. And it gets into like their kind of standard briefing process. And we definitely hear that from the CIOs and the CISOs when we ask, because we ask, we hear in most cases that they've got at least a monthly or sometimes quarterly, but usually monthly actually at least, where they're briefing their deputy and showing their dashboards and talking about the barriers.
I have to say it's really refreshing to hear that Ann Newberg is talking about federal cyber, because from our perspective, that's your sandbox in many ways. And I know that it goes across, but we see her talk a lot about the next level up, right? The state actors, the critical infrastructure, the stuff that's more than just this our little federal world. So it's good that the fact she's talking about it rings even higher up with the deputy secretaries, and I'm not sure publicly we necessarily. It
helps. I mean, because look, we're the management shop, and that matters. And you're right, but like you kind of when you're meeting with OMB, you're thinking about problems from a kind of management perspective.
Right.
When you've got NSC convening you, it's urgent, it's fast, it's what I mean. There's a national security like priority flavor to it, and it has helped. I mean, it really has helped to kind of have both angles of like getting the sense of urgency, but then also having it in the right management, risk management, COO type channels that I think you are thinking the way I do about a deputy role in an agency. You want the CIO paying attention to your portfolio in every case, whoever you are. And we've managed to do that here.
I know the 2025 budget's in the middle. It's all pre-decisional. You can't talk about it. I get all that. I'm going to ask you a question anyways, of course, which is, generally speaking, are there some things that we should look out for yet? Are you seeing some trends? Like agencies really are spending, it looks like they were going to request more money for zero trust in 2025. It looks like one of the pillars is really coming to getting more attention. Is there anything, without going again, crossing a line that you pre-decisional until the president decides is final?
For sure. Look, we put out the FY25 joint OMB, ONCD cyber priorities memo. So I think that's cool and exciting that we're getting to do that every year. We realigned that around the national cybersecurity strategy that we put out, which is like a really good rubric for that memo moving forward. The federal section of that, I think stayed largely static because we have good, strong priorities that we're continuing to, move forward on. So that's good. So their data calls will be adjusted a little bit based on our new approach or adjusted approach in the memo. Look, as far as where we're going to see more requests for others, I think we're just not at that stage of data collection yet. We'll get there soon. But I will say the thing that I think we're all thinking is, like, I think everyone understands that, like, this budget cycle is not a growth budget cycle, right? And not that the others have been large growth budget cycles, but there was some. And I think it's fairly clear that we're going to be dealing with more trade-offs and having to get really granular and specific about where the bang for buck is, in the investment choices that we're making. And that's trading across all portfolios, not just the cyber risk management portfolio. And so we're eyes wide open to that. And I think the good thing for us is, because we've been working on the data for a couple of years now, we're fairly well positioned to be able to have good judgments on where do you just need a little bit more to get over the hump on X, right? And, like, I'm just hoping that as we get into this, that's going to be what guides us through this cycle, right? Because, like, I don't predict, and again, like, it is me getting ahead of to say it definitively, so I won't say it definitively. But no, I'm not, none of us responsibly are predicting that we're going to get to do what we did the last 2 years, which was ask for more than $1.5 billion, a year, 2.7 billion more, 27% increase in federal cyber requests over 2 years. That's pretty fantastic. And, but I do also predict that we're going to continue to make the investments we need, right, in this space, and at least stay static of what we're doing.
I know there's so much more to talk about, and from the budget side, which I know you got to wait till it's final before it's final, but at least we know Congress, for all their trials and tribulations, they seem to get cyber better than they ever have before, which is obviously good news. We've seen that with CISA getting a lot of support. We've seen that with DoD getting support, and obviously with some of the big programs. Chris, I'm going to shift outside of the specific, maybe zero trust discussion, though we could talk longer. One of the big issues that we've talked about is there's, when you look at my favorite report every year, Federal Information Security Management Act to Congress, I read it like I look forward to it each year. I ask you, where is it? When's it coming? You're probably one of two people that do that, but it showed really good signs, and I think we should talk a little bit about just where we are today outside of the zero trust efforts. But it seems like, just based on the data, things are getting better. Things are much better. Can you talk a little bit about, yes, the ratings were down a little bit of what quote unquote effective compared to 2021, but agencies are making progress. Give me kind of, if you give me a state of the union for cybersecurity a little bit. Right. What did the report tell you, and what do you know just based on your discussions?
Yeah, no, look, I mean, so I think the important thing to disaggregate for your audience, right, is there's, IG's doing independent evaluation of agencies and making their own judgments around level of effectiveness of an overall cyber risk management program, which is really important. We actually really rely on those assessments annually to have that. And it's enabled us, and it used to be like, we did the same exact thing they did, and they come in and did it, and then we would sort of like compare notes, right? We made a pretty big decision a couple of years back to say, hey, you're doing a really good job of that. We're going to focus on a subset of really critical capability areas, controls that are stopping adversaries in their tracks, because we just had SolarWinds, and we've got to know granularly how we're doing, why we're not achieving our goals on certain capability areas. And so we're going to spend more time on less, right? While they continue to run a full assessment of an overall program, which you have to do. And we've spent more time on subsets of controls, and we loosened it up to make it even more achievable, like, half of them 1 year, half of them the next, so that we're not just sort of like finishing an assessment and then a week later starting the next assessment for the next year, and agencies have no time to kind of address the gaps and things that they found, right? They were in this just endless do loop. And so we were trying to not stop any of the oversight, do everything we're doing, just do it slightly differently to create more space and to focus on and put more attention on certain priorities, right? That is an experiment, honestly, that we've been running. And, I think it's been going well. Another thing that we did in there is like, working with the IG community. Look, I mean, you can try to count them all the same way across federal agencies if you want. But I think we've found that that's just not, everyone's got different mission, different risk posture, different variables. Some agencies are tiny and have no funds. Some are enormous and have lots. To me, if you're going to say, I'm going to measure progress the same exact way for all of these, I don't think that that's doing cyber risk management. That's more of taking an internal controls process, trying to like slap it onto a cyber risk management problem. I've never seen that work well. And so there's more flexibility now for the IGs to determine effectiveness based on risk factors of their agency. And that has led to some fluctuations and sometimes some challenging conversations for certain agencies when their IG is sort of left to make that determination a little bit on their own. And that's uncomfortable sometimes for IGs because I think they're in their most comfortable place when everybody's doing the same thing, same exact way. So again, another little bit of an experiment, if you will. But Jason, like, I don't know about you, I think if we're not experimenting, if we're not trying something different, and we just keep having really, really big, impactful incidents from our adversaries, I don't feel like I'd be doing my job well. And so sometimes we get some criticism for making these changes actually, but I think we must, and we'll change them if they don't work, right? But I would say overall, because we're doing that now, agencies are focused on the right things and are making good progress on them. And that's a lot of what we talked about, right? That's another one thing you hear from an agency, like, can you help me determine what the real priorities are? I mean, it's constantly, because they just got too many. And so in large part, that's what we've been trying to do. And there has been some fluctuation in the ratings as a result. But we're very close with the IGs in sort of an appropriate way, in like making sure that they understand what we're doing, what we're after, and why. And then they go off and do their own independent assessments, completely independent. But we communicate in an appropriate way and stay close to that, and help them through that and help them understand what we're trying to do.
Over the years, that's been one of the most, I think, frustrating things around cybersecurity. The IGs are looking at 100 controls or 500 controls, and the agency says, yes, but we're really focused on these 20 or 40 or 80 controls. So we're getting kind of that negative feedback or that wrist slap because we didn't focus on 300 other controls, but those we determined didn't matter. So it sounds to me like there's, again, you talk about cyber risk management, there's some coming together about, okay, what does that mean and how to apply that to the best way for, again, you mentioned HHS or VA with huge budgets or, American battle monuments have ruined their name, but they're very small and they probably don't have a ton of cyber either skill sets or money, so they measure risk differently. Right.
No, I mean, and that's it. And so, when we focus on things like getting MFA in place, encrypting the data so if it is taken, it is hopefully of no use to the adversary. A lot on attack surface, reduction, just like real red teaming and pen testing and vulnerability disclosure efforts that find and look at the CISA KEV catalog, which are the critical vulnerabilities that are being exploited by bad guys today. It's like managing risk around those things, you will stop more bad activity if you do those first. And that's what we've been saying, Jason.
You mentioned the data, you mentioned the work with IGs. I know you've also gotten a little bit of heat from your friends on Capitol Hill, Congressman Connolly, specifically around FITAR scorecard and how you're doing. Where are you at with that discussion? I know he's been asking about, well, what are the metrics and how do we measure the metrics and why are you changing the metrics? And without going into the back and forth too much, where are you kind of trying to meet the goals for Capitol Hill, just like you're trying to work with IGs?
Yeah, and I give a lot of credit to the congressman for his dedication and leadership on having scorecards. You know what I mean, in our space. His leadership on that is just unquestionable. So, that doesn't mean though we necessarily fully agree on exactly how we should be measuring the cyber risk ratings piece of it. But it's very collegial. There's been lots of discussions between our teams over how do you balance that? Because they want to and should have an independent rating scorecard. But just like we work with the IGs, we've found a way to do that, I think, and I think we will there too, of you're doing your own independent ratings assessment, grabbing what you want, but understanding how we're thinking about the problem, what we're measuring and why, those are the types of conversations to have with them that I think are really educational for all, and we'll continue to have. So I predict that we'll get to a good place there. But I think it's hard to come to consensus explicitly on how are you measuring cyber progress. I mean, it's always been hard. And I think, and especially when you don't live it and breathe it like every second of the day, like I do, and you often do too, I think it's hard to trust or understand that some of these hard truths are something you have to sort of accept and then just move to the next, right? And just say it's like, why can't I just measure this one thing and then less bad things happen if I go from here to here? And as you know, in our space, maybe not, because maybe it's got to go from there to there before, but you have to go on that path to get there, or you never get to the point where you're actually stopping it. And I mean, that's the hard thing about explaining what we do.
It's the old, with cyber, prove the negative. Well, because we did this, attack didn't happen. How do you know that? Well, because we didn't get attacked, but
right.
How do you know it was because of this versus the bad actor just didn't attack you? And that's always been the hardest. So we look for risk
proxies to just say okay, right, did we close a whole bunch of those KEVs off the catalog? Are agencies, removing all of these vulnerabilities that are getting exploited by bad guys today in the wild, and did they close 60% of those? To me, that's a really good risk proxy measure of saying I know we shut a lot of doors and made it a lot harder. And in some days, Jason, you walk home feeling pretty good about you did your job that day.
A lot more to talk to. I don't want you to get away from our discussion without talking about legacy IT. One of the things with the National Cyber Strategy and the implementation plan that comes with it is this idea of, how to get out from under legacy IT. I remember years ago during the Obama administration, Tony Scott, the former federal CIO, talked about it's $7 billion of technical debt was the best estimate they could make. That's been 5, 6, 7 years now, so I'm sure that number's only grown. From a cyber perspective, the most critical thing you can do is get out from legacy debt, technical debt, to really improve your cybersecurity. What are some thoughts around that? How are you driving that encouragement to get agencies out beyond implement zero trust, get off the old system or get off the old technology?
Yeah, well, so I worked for Tony in the Obama administration and kind of the project manager for the Cyber National Action Plan. So what was true then when we did kind of a blue sky assessment of what are all the challenges that we could take on here? What do we really need to do? Because that's what President Obama was asking for. One of the biggest of them was we just got to modernize all this tech. Because until we do it, we're just going to keep running the same barriers of not being able to implement modern security protections. So, okay, great, got it. So TMF was created, tons of great progress since then. I think we're saying is that's been going well. We're making progress. We've made a lot of progress since then. And we need some more ambitious goals and targets. So in the National Cyber Strategy, we set one. We said, hey, over the next decade, we really need to have federal tech that is able to accept, security protections that align with zero trust principles, I believe is about how we cut it. Giving us space for that may change exactly what that means. Security protections will change, over that time span. But in general, we've got to be able to put modern security controls in place. And so that's what we're focused on now in the National Cyber Strategy Implementation Plan. That we have a work stream around that. We'll be developing strategies, engagement strategies around what else we may be able to do in this space to build off of our successes that we've had in the past. So yeah, I guess but the real thing is, and Claire and I talk about this constantly, and this is something that she's focused like a laser beam on for maybe different priority sets, modernization to CX delivery and stuff like that. But it's the common thing that cybersecurity and IT professionals across the federal government are staring at is yes, we need to keep going there, and we need more resources, and we need more attention in getting there fast.
Have you done a reassessment of how much technical debt there is? Has that come down and gone up? Has it changed? It's a hard estimate without a doubt. Have you guys done anything?
I don't know. I don't know if we have a number on that. It's a really good question that I don't have off the top of my head. But look, it's.
I haven't heard a number recently.
I guess I would have thought it's a lot bigger.
Yeah.
To be honest with you now, right? Or even back then.
Yeah.
It feels like a conservative estimate to me, frankly.
We'll talk to Tony. We can call Tony about that. Tony, what have you been doing? the other side, when you talk about work streams and strategies and really ensuring, is that something that will open the door to policies, will open the door to what will those look like? Task forces, tiger teams, like how are you going about the implementation side? Because if I'm an agency listening, oh God, Chris is about to give me something else to do. Aren't I busy enough? And as you said, you get those questions all the time from CIOs and CISOs. How do I prioritize? So here's something else that's related, but another priority.
Yeah. I was told to look at the camera when I want to talk to someone. So CIOs and CISOs, I do feel your pain, but also all the teams working hard underneath them. Look, we give a lot of requirements, and it is tough to balance all of it. I think the answer to all your questions is yes, but we're working on the specifics of how. In general, we're more envisioning maybe legislative strategies, updates or pieces to current policy, FISMA guidance, things like that, right? Like using CIO council, using current mechanisms to start moving things in a different way, creating initiatives and whatnot. It's possible, like one day we'll need a new memo on it. I don't think like we ever shut the door to needing new policy, but it's not the case that like we're drafting a new policy today on this, Jason.
Right.
But happy to come back to you if we do decide to do that, and chat about it.
I look forward to it. It makes my day when there's it's not quite as exciting as a FISMA report to Congress. Don't get me wrong, but good policy is good policy.
You are one of the 2 or 3 people that say that enthusiastically.
I will wear my nerd badge proudly. Don't worry, Chris. A couple other things I want to touch base with you in the last few minutes we have together. The Federal Acquisition Security Council, one of the parts of the Cyber Leaders Exchange, we're definitely talking about supply chain risk management, big issue. What's an update you can give us on FASC? I was at an event recently and they said, oh, that's close. The final exclusion rule is close, which we know an OMB talk could be tomorrow, and it could also be 6 months from now. So where are you at with FASC? A couple updates.
Yeah, look, I mean, on the FASC, we have made a good amount of progress in getting established process in place, procedures in place. We do have a final rule in place that sort of guides our activities. Of course, as you know, we have multiple sort of authorities within the FASC. And again, just for clarity, I chair the FASC along with colleagues from, on the council, or colleagues across all of the agencies that have major supply chain equities. So we really run this thing together. And beyond sharing of supply chain risk information, we have the Removal Exclusion Authority as well, which is the ability to remove and or exclude some particular technology and or vendor from federal contracts. And so that could be not just you can't work with us contractually. If you are already, now we're going to have to work on efforts to rip that technology out. Big authority, right? And it's sort of a big movement. Obviously, like there is a confidentiality clause in the law that I'm not allowed to talk about any specific reviews and things. But what I will say is like we're actively exercising all of our authorities. We're doing what we should be, and you got to get it right. When you move in these directions, and I think we're being very rigorous, and we're also being somewhat cautious because everything we do in the FASC is largely the first time it's been done that way. And so that's hard at times to be able to kind of get symbiosis and across many agencies to sort of do something one way, which is not standard for federal government. Agencies will do their own exercise their own authorities, and we're talking about with the FASC, you exercise an authority in one way for all. And look, I mean, I think that it's been a really interesting job to have. It's one of my 7 hats. I was
going to say, for a lot of folks, it's a lot of different hats. It's good to hear that, as you said, actively exercising all our authority. So I will take that to say there are potential exclusions / removals being discussed. I'll try to interpret it that way without putting you into risk. In the last minute, I think the last thing maybe to talk about, because there's a lot more we could talk about, let's talk a little bit about the workforce real quick, because you cannot have a conversation when you talk cyber without the workforce. We know there's not enough cyber workers, there's not enough people. There's been pushes over the years to retraining, upskilling, reskilling. You had the cyber Workforce Reskilling Academy or Upskilling Academy. What is happening with the workforce? What are you doing? What should we look out for from OMB in terms of the next year or so about how to help agencies find, train, keep trained the next generation?
Yeah, I know it's a great question. I mean, when you look at the core pillars of our key enablers, I mean, workforce is probably number one. I put it higher than budget, but that's not far behind. Procurement, right? Like there's just a few of these things that you need to be successful. So we just put out a national workforce strategy, Office of National Cyber Director, and I'm excited about that. There's a whole pillar inside that strategy that's focused on the federal workforce. That was very much intentional, while the focus is national. And there's upwards of about 70 tasks or action streams in that. So much like the National Cyber Strategy Implementation Plan, like we're now in the phase of having just released that of getting the work plan together. And there's a lot of different work streams tasked in there for the federal side. A lot of it is sort of identifying the areas that we have been working on but need new energy inserted, maybe new support from Congress or whatever it's going to be. And we'll get busy about like defining that clearly and putting together swim lanes and then actioning it. But there's new rotational program that we've got now. We've got some thoughts around how to tackle the HR side and back ends of this. So I think it's just it's kind of like putting a thesis on top of some really good work, right? Like we're moving the ball forward in a whole bunch of different directions at once is sort of the plan. And I think that's right, because like if there had been a silver bullet to this problem, well, 20 years ago, they would have fixed the cyber workforce problem, and here we are still talking about, hey, gosh, everyone's still using different classifications and terms across the departments and agencies. Because they haven't even fixed that, right? So like we've got more work to do that's blocking and tackling work, and I'm excited that the strategy is actually also a practical implementation plan.
Chris, we're just about time. I'm going to give you maybe a minute or less just to maybe sum up our discussion today. What's the message you want to make sure both CISOs and CIOs get, but also the workers who are in all the mission areas around cybersecurity? I'll give you that last minute here to kind of look into the camera maybe, and don't point though, don't point. But
no point. No point.
That gets a little too. But really, in all honesty, what do you hope they take away from our conversation today?
Yeah, look, a few things. I mean, I like to say this is, be kind to yourself. We know we're asking sort of more than can be done at once, and I think it's because there's just such a sense of urgency around these issues. You all know that, being part of the community that's like on the front lines of trying to protect your agency's data and systems. And like all I can say is, continue to keep on it because we're going to keep the pedal strong here. And I think we have to. But also like, we recognize the effort and what we've asked of this community. I mean, this community are heroes, okay? I mean, like the amount of personal sacrifice that these folks put into this work. And I know I've been part of that community here at the state level, like doing the 1 a.m. triage calls and trying to figure out what's going on in your environment, and you don't sleep until it's done. That is what is going on. And it's just, thank you, but also, again, be kind to yourself. Our jobs are too hard, so that's not our fault. We're just going to do them the best that we can, right? And I see that commitment, and we are just super thankful that the workforce, the dedicated workforce, continues to plod forward despite the challenges that continue to get thrown at them.
And if you can't tell, they're definitely making progress. I mean,
1,000%.
I see a big difference in terms of how cyber is being addressed today than they were 5, 10, 15 years ago, and the reaction to potential and real threats. So, Chris, I could talk to you much longer, but unfortunately, we're out of time for this session of the Cyber Leaders Exchange. Let me thank my guest. Chris DeRusha is the Federal Chief Information Security Officer and Deputy National Cyber Director. Chris, it's always a pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much.
Yeah, likewise, Jason. It's been great to be here.
I'm Jason Miller, and you've been watching Federal News Network. Now let me send you back to the studio for more from the Cyber Leaders Exchange.